Okay. Well, I'm going to keep it on gallery for a little bit so we can see each other, see who's here. I'd love to have everyone just say who they are and why they're here real quick. Is that okay? I know some of you are not on screen, so maybe, oh, yeah, I don't want to, if you're in your place of work, to disturb you. So I'm Tamsin Woolley-Barker. I'm an evolutionary biologist. You all know who I am. So Krista, would you like to kick it off?
Sure. Hi, good morning, everybody. My name is Krista Nordstrom, and I work with Dr. Tamsin. And I'm her right-hand person sometimes. So if you ever can't reach her, I'd be your person to call.
All right. Harry, you want to say hi?
Hi, Harry, and I'm in New York, and founding member of the Biomimicry NYC, and also founder of Brand Earth, and committed to amplifying nature to the max.
Harry, I'm going to mute you because you're kind of noisy over there. There you go. Okay. Do that with Sylvia. Okay, Sylvia, hi, are you there?
Hi, can you hear me?
I can hear you. Do you want to just say hi real quick? Say who you are?
Yeah, I'm Sylvia. I'm a biologist too, and I'm from Italy.
Thank you so much for coming. And I know that Sylvia is an expert in biomimicry management as well. So.
Yeah.
Thank you. Gloria, you have been in my orbit for a long time, and it's a pleasure to finally meet you.
Nice to meet you too.
Thank you for hanging in with me.
Oh, my pleasure. That's what nature does. We hang in with each other.
That's right. I love it. Do you want to say something about yourself?
Sure. My name is Gloria Rivera. I'm in Detroit, Michigan. And for probably 7 years, I've been very interested in biomimicry. I started with a friend and coordinated the Great Lakes Bioneers Detroit, which we fortunately were able to pass on to another college. So I am retired, which gives me more time to do what I love, which is biomimicry, among other things. So thank you. I'm very glad I could connect with you.
Thank you so much. Okay, Randy, you want to say hi? Hi, Randy.
Hello. Good to see you again,
Good to see you.
Tamsin.
Do you want to say something about yourself real quick?
Sure. I'm an architect. I'm based in Connecticut, licensed in Connecticut and New York. I'm also doing some work with a group of systems engineers around how do I put this? Looking at natural systems and social systems, and thinking about how do we engineer things differently, using guidance from nature.
Yeah, all about that. Ari, I don't know if we have your voice. No, but I'm super just really delighted that you're here. And yeah, super cool. Let's see if we can figure this. I wonder if you could put it on your phone. Like call in also on your phone, and then we can hear you. Because I know you're going to have a lot of interesting things to say. I wonder if I can.
Sometimes the settings somewhere in your computer settings might have a microphone.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking.
Yeah, if you're a Mac, that can be a little, it's not too hard, but sometimes they're a little buried on a Windows system. They're kind of buried.
Will it go back to that setting, do you think? Well, mine usually does.
Yeah, sometimes you do have to restart. Or log out and log back in.
Right. You want to try that? Okay. Yeah, I'd love to have you. That'd be awesome. Ari, you're the owner of Zingerman's Deli, is that correct? I recognized your name. I was like, oh, I'm a big fan. It's true. Yeah, it's quite a delight to have you. Okay, I'm going to get started. Let's see. All right, welcome to your teaming transformation. So like I say, I'm Dr. Tamsin, and I got to wear a lot of hats. I'm the CEO of Team Innovation Group, and I'm also the Dean of the School for Biocultural Leadership at Geoversity, which is in Panama. So I do a variety of things. Okay, we just had like 4 people join us, so I'm going to go back. Hello, everyone. Just starting up. Okay, so welcome, teaming transformation. So a little bit about my background. You mostly probably all know me, but I'm an evolutionary biologist by training, and I've always been really passionate about, living systems and creatures, organisms, always. And so I've been also been an entrepreneur for the last 20 years, and I'm a committed entrepreneur. I'm into it. And then somewhere along the way, I discovered biomimicry and started working to apply what I knew about evolutionary biology to organizational strategy and design. It's been very rewarding, and I think it's about to change the world. That's what I believe. So like I said, I got my start as an evolutionary biologist, and I was actually working in Ethiopia with baboons. So this was in the field. I was a field primatologist. And there were 2 very different kinds of baboons that were meeting and mating in this region. And it looked like they'd been doing it for about 1 million years. So they were not blending, they were retaining their individual characteristics. And my question was, how does their individual social behavior affect their population level patterns of cooperation, adaptation, and ultimately speciation, differentiation? And they're social primates, a lot like ourselves. And in fact, this is the Rift Valley. So this is the, cradle of human origins here. So it's worth looking at them to ask, how does evolution really happen in animals like us? And this is still like the current model for, this was used to predict Neanderthal interbreeding and all the models that we're looking at with human evolution right now. This is a model for doing that. And it's still cited. So, but then, life got in the way, and I'm a novelist and an artist. So I had a broader picture. I was raising children, all those things. So all kinds of shit to roll. Then I discovered biomimicry at that point. And I wrote this book, Teaming, which I imagine you've heard of since you're here. But basically I was asking, how does nature operate a company? How would nature operate a company on a finite planet like ours? And how do nature's teams stay agile and resilient and adaptable, right? That's what we want in our businesses. And how do nature's organizations adapt and transform to regenerate possibility from one generation to the next? Because they don't just operate, they have to, launch their children into the future, and they have to make that future a good place for them. And more importantly, how might we? So since that time, I've been working with a lot of companies. I work primarily with Cisco. If you've used WebEx in the last year, a lot of those features are mine. So I see a groundswell of interest in this. This is the first workshop in the Team Lab, which is my new membership for entrepreneurs, leaders, and agents of change, because I want to help people use evolutionary design in their work in order to make these transformations that we really need. And then Geoversity is an amazing school that we work with indigenous communities and leaders like climate warriors and land protectors. And so that's exciting for me because I've always been a huge fan of Jane, and it just feels right to be in that place. And then I operate the Borrego Institute for Living Design. This is a new thing, and it's a creative ecotone at the edge of art, nature, and story. So becoming more of a whole human being, which is, part of the struggle with our workplaces, that we're forced to leave so much of our humanity at home. So I think this is a place where we can remember that we're living creatures and be equal participants. And then maybe we'll take that back into our life and work, and regenerate the way that we live. So that's my purpose, really, is to catalyze the realignment of our lives and work with life's deep patterns, which is, the flows and the constraints of life on Earth. And not only that, but our special nature as human animals. So, you know, it's there's a lot of different ways to make a living, and humans have done it in a specific way, but it's important to understand what that nature is if we're going to live into it, right? If we're going to live into our potential. And the pattern that I've noticed is that we are cultivators of potential in our environment, equal participants in the fabric of life. And I think when we embrace that, I think that everything we do will change. I like to hope so. So here's one thing you can notice. This is just an example that, you know, here we are, to run our cities, we take 20% of the world's annual energy to maintain that. But here's these termites in Botswana that I saw a couple years ago. And these are 30 feet tall, and they use no energy whatsoever to maintain their temperature to 1 degree. So they're able to completely regulate their environment with no fossil fuels. So the flow of life, here's an example you might know. This is Jay Harmon's company, PAX. And he, you know, he's an Australian surfer, spent a lot of time in the ocean, and he noticed these flows of the waves, and he noticed the way that the shells grew. And, you know, we have this idea of the quickest way to get from point A to point B is a straight line. But in reality, in nature, things are swirling and spiraling. And so designing with those flows has made these fans and these impellers, I think he's up to 80% more efficient and quiet. And that's just one area of our lives. So there's so much potential here that we haven't tapped because we're always fighting the flow. But what if we worked with it? So I like to say that, you know, you are a child of the universe, no less than the trees and the stars. So let's participate as equal participants, as animals that are equal survivors on Earth and equal potential to give in our own way. So this is the first sneak peek on my new book, which is The Teeming Transformation. It's not going to look anything like this because I actually wrote 250 pages like I do. I have, you know, like to write a lot. But when I got to the end, I was like, what do I really want this to do? I want it to change the world. So it has to be accessible. It has to be compelling. So I've turned it into a picture book. It only has like 250 words in it now. So all that other writing is backstory now. So you may get to see that in the team lab. I'll put all that in the team lab. But for now, you guys get the sneak peek. So this is a photographic workbook for evolutionary design. So it's guided considerations, like questions and prompts and provocations for entrepreneurs, leaders, and agents of change who want to grow their unique capacity and influence while achieving transformation the same way that life always has. I think it's really powerful. So we line with life, we can serve for free. All this work and energy that we put into constraining life when we could just work with what it is and serve for free. So that's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to learn a little bit about life's simple rules and deep patterns. We're going to walk through some frameworks that I've created that will hopefully generate some insights for you that are actionable that you can put into use. I'm going to have a lot of provocations and questions, and we'll have a lot of discussion together. So the basic question is, how do living things adapt to change while growing the future possibilities their offspring inherit? And how can we? I think that's kind of the question that we're always asking. So to me, you know, I think nothing makes sense except in the light of evolution. So if we don't understand it, we can't influence our future in a conscious, intentional way. So we have to be the navigators, consciously evolving our collective future. So let's get cracking. So scale up. We're always talking about that in our businesses, right? And we want to produce more impact and profit using less time, money, labor, and materials, right? But how do we do that? do we scale up? What is the process that we use? So I, think about that, like, okay, well, we take the system that we want to, do something with, and we analyze it, we break it up into parts, and then we want to maximize each of those parts, right? So we test and we maximize, we tweak, and we optimize all the components. Then when we figure that out, we standardize each of those and we scale it up, right? So that we don't have to do each one on a one-off basis. We can do it in a kind of a bulk way, economies of scale, right? So I'm going to open this up now. If everybody wants to, well, you can keep your mute on and then just take it off when you want to say something. But where does this model work for you? But where does it fall short? Just, popcorn. I'll get you started. So scale up, obviously, it allows you to have more profit and impact with less work on each one. You're not in a one-off situation. But where it falls short is if you standardize everything, you've taken all the adaptivity out of the system. And you've also optimized the components, not the system itself. So you're going to have kind of a fragile hodgepodge of things. And what do you do when conditions change? You've got to restructure and issue new directives, and you have to convince people to change their behaviors. All those things that we do. And, test and maximize the component performance, but in what context? And that, of course, requires prediction. What is the future going to look like? And control. And how do we know what X should even be? What are those predictions and who makes them? And what are they based on? So we see a lot of ideals and assumptions that are not always voiced. And it always comes from the top, right? And the top only has a pair of eyes, right? They can't know everything and they can't see the front lines. So what preconceptions, assumptions, ideals, categories, perspectives, or stereotypes are limiting your organization's ability to predict what X should be? And can we open this up for a few minutes? Just have a little discussion. Ari, I can't hear you. I'm so bummed. You want to write in the chat? No, that's lame.
So here's an easy one.
Here, good.
Building codes.
Oh.
Yeah, they're totally out of date. And they're always out of date. They're always trying to change. And
building
codes.
Yeah.
Building codes. It's nuts.
Yeah. Uh-huh. And yet, who comes up with those codes?
Oh, it's people,
Uh-huh. But based on a prediction, right? Or like
well, yeah, it's all based on assumptions.
Yeah.
And these assumptions get sliced and diced finer and finer and finer, and more and more codes. It just gets complexity layered on complexity.
And it really reduces the ability to adapt because it's each code is sort of a patch on a problem, right? Like somebody did something bad, so we're going to prevent that.
And it increases costs.
Yeah, and then you get boxed in. Like there's only so many things you can do.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Get locked in. All kinds of stuff flows from that. But it built this huge economy.
On the code, the other thing that happens is like climate change, the assumptions that were previously made are different. And so what might have worked historically no longer works. So we're dealing with a new set of existing conditions.
I think some people can probably see change coming, but they may not be the people that are asked.
Hi, Tamsin. I don't know if you can read the chat.
Oh.
I wrote that this is called reductionism. And it doesn't take into account the relationship between the single parts of the system.
That's
So
right.
this is the limit. This is the limit.
That's right. Yeah. We're optimizing parts instead of systems. And then the other thing is, you know, if you've got predictions and all of those things, restructuring, it all comes from the top, from these hierarchies. And really in nature, hierarchies are designed to prevent change and filter signals. So you have, you know, a hierarchy of neurons in your brain and body, and that's designed to filter out noise, and so you can make sense of the world. And then you have a hierarchical immune system that's actually roaming, searching for cancerous cells all the time in your body and removing them. So hierarchies actually serve the purpose of preventing change in living systems, and filtering those signals, those, you know, different perspectives and different noise that may indicate a growing signal that we don't know about. So it's the way we are adapting to change is all backwards. And what does this prediction and control produce? It's super expensive, like Randy was saying, produces a fragile patchwork of these reactive solutions that have unintended consequences. I'm thinking of the cane toads in Australia. Like, we got a problem, let's throw in a cane toad. Now we have a problem, let's throw in something to eat those. And like, it just gets out of control. And it constrains adaptability, like we're talking about. And it also erodes this unique potential that everyone has and that organizations have. Because we're standardizing, we're removing the potential for adapting to change, but also for innovation and creativity and uniqueness. And that is what makes you irreplaceable. And not only that, it disengages your workers and your consumers, and you only get X. So then when conditions change, you've only got X. All right, and settling for X will get you killed because predictions are only probabilities in real life. So here comes the biomimicry part. Every organism alive had an unbroken string of ancestors that survived for 3.8 billion years. That's 5 catastrophic extinction events and just a chaotic world when nobody could predict what was going to happen. So, but we all survived, right? So that resilience and adaptability and regeneration, those things that we want in our organizations are actually in our DNA. So all we have to do is be human about it, and we should be okay. So here's life, catastrophic stuff happening, adapting to change. And here are these problems with this efficiency design that we have. So, not only is it constraining adaptability and affecting our employees and stakeholders, but it also, because it's all the same, it leaves you wide open to parasites, because parasites game conformity, and it leaves us sitting ducks for the next crisis. And that's where we're at right now. The question I get is, if we are nature too, then why do we have to copy other species? Which is a great question. And I would say that here's my answer. Look at this and tell me what's missing. I Googled STEM logos and what's missing.
A lot.
Yeah, like anything alive.
There's a whole other acronym.
Yeah, it was a little disturbing for me to realize that. And then I started thinking about that and why are we trying to get all our kids to do STEM? And it's so that we can be more efficient. So then no wonder we took the life out of it. So interesting. But how does nature adapt to change? And so how does nature adapt to change? And so as an evolutionary biologist, this has been a lifetime exhausting labor of love, but looking for life's deep patterns. What are the things that all life does, and what are those patterns that we would do well to align with to surf for free? So individuals do compete to obtain and utilize resources efficiently. Efficiency does matter, but they avoid wasting their energy and their lives on competition. So you see, like, these are Darwin's finches, and maybe one finch made it to the islands. I think it was several actually, but let's say one did, and they all are trying their best to eat the things that these finches eat. And then over time, they avoid competing with each other, and so they become more different. They pursue their own unique way of doing things, and that's how evolution occurs. Evolution requires three things to work. So diversity is the key thing. It's the limiting factor on the rate of change, because evolution can only select from what's available. It can't create something new. It can through mutation, but it's accidental and slow. But so that diversity of things that are already present in the population, already working, is how the population shifts. So, and then exchange among complementary, capable, reliable partners. And we'll get more into that. And then life has to have opportunity, has to have somewhere to go to take advantage of things. Life doesn't solve problems. It just moves toward the next open door. And that's something that I think is key to evolutionary design. That we're not solving problems, we are working on potential. So here we go. Diversity is the raw feedstock of evolution. Oops, I want to go back. Natural selection, there's diverse variants in a population, and natural selection is choosing among them or removing some. Some do better than others, and the population shifts over time in that way. So that is the nature of evolution. You can see, I just got back from the most incredible trip to Panama. I went down this wild river in this the amazing Hunit territory, and you could see this. Like, I saw a giant butterfly, and then 2 miles down the road I saw another one of that kind, but it looked totally different. So the variation and the diversity is really astonishing out there. So what happens if diversity is lacking? And what restrains diversity in your organization? So let's open that for a second.
This is Gloria. I am thinking in particular of not-for-profit organizations, which I think would benefit from biomimicry. And one thing that restrains is that the thing that the funders expect things to be done in the way that they think they need to be done. So creativity is often minimized or disappears because we in this case is a not-for-profit, we have to respond to the funder or to becomes the quote authority, when in fact that authority often doesn't have enough of a sense of the organization.
Right, because they don't have the diversity of perspectives. Let's say for you, what's restraining diverse perspectives and expression in your work or your organization?
Well, I could add something here, and that is fortunate enough to have a very diverse organization, and we work at that, very intentionally. So benefiting from diversity, and I feel like what that gives us is a lot more signals to pick up. Like, we are able to pick up way more signals because we have different communities, different people from different walks of life in the group. But I would also say that my experience has been that the more diversity you have, the slower you need to move, because you need to, at least I've noticed as running organizations, you can't, when you have homogeneity, everybody gets it right away because they all have the same, they all grew up on the same block and they all get it. And then when you bring diverse people together to make decisions and operate, it takes, you can't just say go, we talk about it and say, is this the right go? And so you inherently have to slow it down, which slows down growth, which slows down a lot of things, which doesn't actually fit business efficiency, speed, all of those things.
That's right. And I know, like, for we talk about scale up, a lot of that is suppressing diversity so you can scale, right? Well,
Right.
you want it standardized.
Mhm.
So we have these competing things that we say that we want, but we actually, are being forced to do it because it doesn't align with the efficiency. So we really need a radical change in the way that we think about it. Then to increase diversity, in nature, it increases through exchange and recombination. And so these are actually ants, and they go on their nuptial flight. So when the perfect conditions, all the female, the virgin queens take to the air, and they have to mate with as many males as they can to store that lifetime supply of diversity that they need for their colony to succeed. So what's restraining exchange between individuals or departments in your organization, or between disciplines and stakeholders in your organization or your work? You want to speak to that?
Time, bandwidth.
Yeah, efficiency, right? You can't, that's my problem. And then like COVID, right? We can't even get in the same room. Well, now
Distance.
we can. But a lot of it, like language barriers, and not just cultural language, but cultural of different disciplines, right? I mean, if you've worked with engineers, it's just a different culture to it, and that does keep us from doing exchange. And I just noticed in the organizations I've worked with, like for Cisco, for instance, people get really siloed, and it turns out they're working on the same thing, but they're in, across the world, and they didn't know because it's a different department and it's a different subject. And so one of the things like we're doing at Cisco with the WebEx is we do these like these kind of random mashups where 3 people get linked together. And I mean, they have told us, they put in there what their interests are, but they are getting matched together with people that share that interest, but from a completely different perspective. And then they get an email introduction, and so it's it facilitates that cross-fertilization, and it has the side benefit of kind of integrating the organization more as well. Like people in diverse departments know what's going on in other places. So how can you increase it? How can you increase exchange and recombination so that it increases the diversity of potential? And you might be wanting more of it across departments or among stakeholders or across cultures. Is anybody trying to do that or thinking about that?
A lot of times it boils down to, just meeting people and talking it out, trying to agree on some common language and things like that. And then once you get those kind of down, then there's a basis for further creativity, actual innovation.
I think that a good idea could be the job rotation.
Yeah.
Because I've experienced this, and I think it's a good way to increase exchange and recombination across different departments.
Yeah. PK, I don't know if you heard that that case study the other day, but that was like the Packers were getting their own culture, and the service people were getting a different culture, and the organization was kind of floundering because they weren't able to integrate those. And one of the ideas was job rotation, and another one is Covicent, if you know that, and they actually had parallel innovation tracks in Europe and the US, and people could switch between them. So it really got a lot of novelty and interesting ideas. So exchange, we know, is greatest at the edges. And as a someone that studied hybrid zones, I can tell you that those edges are very lively with diversity, but also, they're attracted to the diversity of opportunities there at the edge. There's more possibility, like think of Bambi on the edge of the meadow, So individuals are constrained by their intrinsic nature, but also the diversity of opportunities that are available to them. So that's the third part of what's required for evolution is opportunity. So here you see kind of a succession, a natural succession. So like, let's say Glacier Bay, here's this retreating glacier and it's opening up this bare rock. And so what's the first thing that comes in? You start getting lichens and moss and small things like that. And they're creating soil. And then some weeds blow in, and those are opportunistic. They work fast and they take what they can. And then you get a little infrastructure in there and you start getting the mycelial networks. So you start increasing the capabilities of the ecosystem. You get shrubs coming in, and those become nurse plants for trees. And then you get a variety of trees. But then as it goes on, things become more efficient and it becomes more competitive. And so if efficiency was the only thing, you would see something like the redwood forests in Santa Cruz, where it's kind of a one kind of tree is predominant, and they're competing for height, for sun. And so that's what you see in a competitive environment. But then if you look in tropical, in Panama, where I work, it is just so diverse. And so there's clearly more to it than efficiency. You can see that there. So this is what happens is that succession, as it moves towards more competition and more efficiency, it crowds out upstarts. So it crowds out opportunity. It's harder to get a start. And so what happens is, you have to wait for some kind of disturbance, a fire or something like that, that opens those possibilities up again. And then the cycle starts again. And in reality, you see a patchwork of these, a mosaic of states. And that's how diversity increases. But there's a number of opportunities in this where you can be looking for these. So, is a new opportunity opening up some bare ground? You want to work quickly and take advantage of that as a weedy kind of species. But then, as things get locked up and efficiency increases, competition, you need to start investing in diverse relationships so that you can open potential for your offspring, because they're going to need a start, right? So what you do is you invest in these diverse relationships and you get these balances of different species and flows of energy and more opportunity. So it's growing. And then another thing you can do is to grow capabilities in others that you are investing in those relationships, and that grows the future possibilities. So that's another strategy. And then when things get locked up, you can create small disturbances that release that locked up potential. And that's like what the Native Americans did, is they used prescribed burns. And in Panama, they were using like a milpa cycle, where they would maintain these patches of diversity. So they had more different kinds of species, more different kinds of food, and more possibilities. And that's the way that ecosystems generally work. So I wanted to ask, where do these patterns play out for you, and where might you be more intentional? Does any of this give you an idea of something you might do in your work?
I can jump in.
Yeah, please.
If I'm not taking up space from anybody else who wants
No,
to jump
please
in. I love this question and this thing. So I teach entrepreneurship, advanced entrepreneurship and all that stuff, and work with a lot of entrepreneurs. And when I see this, I think of the pattern is, find an opportunity, learn how to, serve that kind of mine that opportunity. And then as the enterprise develops, we kind of say, well, you need to be part of an ecosystem. You're not just a business sitting on your own, you're part of an ecosystem, and that includes diverse relationships, suppliers, government, influencers, all kinds of folks. And then growing capabilities in the rest of the ecosystem to grow future possibilities. That's something I talk about a lot, but this idea of creating small disturbances to release locked up to potential, maybe what would that look like? If you don't mind kind of examining, because that seems, creating a disturbance could, it unlocks potential, but it could dislodge people who are now really happy, or organizations that are working well in the ecosystem as it is.
Yeah, well, for instance, with the prescribed burns, with they're actually increasing the resilience of the system by making small disturbances that, so that you don't become too big to fail. And then, like we talk about stress tests on banks. So that is a resilience measure that prevents catastrophic things from happening later. But it also increases the diversity of possibilities. So
you have to be really selfless, right? As an ecosystem player, to encourage that to happen.
Well, it is interesting, and perhaps I think that is the switch that we need to make of thinking more long term and growing our environment, not just the our habitat, but the social environment as well. Okay, and so in your work, where do you need more of these things? Because it's not the same everywhere, right? Sometimes you do need more efficiency, and other times you need more adaptability or more resilience. So I think the adaptive cycle can help you there. And I wonder if anyone has any insight there for themselves. Yeah, go ahead.
Oops. I think probably for me anyways, it would be more adaptability. And where we're at, with our enterprises. We have lots of creativity, lots of, and we have a little bit of efficiency, and we're pretty good at resilience because of our ecosystem work as an enterprise. But adaptability is, what if I don't know how to put this in a biomimicry term, but when things shift in the marketplace in a big way, adaptability means tearing down a bunch of stuff and moving what you have, taking one thing in a suitcase and moving it over to a whole new forest. I don't know if that's the right way to think about it, but
yeah, I'm thinking of a lot of, in the forest, a lot of organisms use animal dispersers to travel further, so they can find a new habitat. And that, again, it's a symbiotic relationship where they have designed themselves to take advantage of that relationship, like reliably.
I think that adaptability is also something connected with the change, because adaptability is change. If you think about a virus, when it adapts, it has to change at genetic level in its DNA or RNA. So when we have to adapt, there's the need of a change.
And then, oh yeah, go ahead, Harry.
Just looking at your slide, for me, up until this point, I began to have the feeling of we are changing from force to source, because most of the world has been in such a dynamic viewpoint of how business has to succeed, that if we take an acre of nature, and you have that in ACRE on your slide, that we need all of it at the same time.
Uh-huh.
If we do it one step at a time, we're just going from silo to silo until we can get everybody to be together.
Uh-huh.
So it's taking that slow moment that PK was talking about, going slow in order to be able to reconcile all of these steps in adaptability, creativity, resilience, and efficiency. Taking it one step at a time, that seems like the long term.
Right.
So it's something to assimilate. It's kind of like stopping what we were doing in order to slow it down enough to really take a look at what we have to do going forward. It's a massive responsibility, but it's taking the term sustainability and changing it to sustain agility.
Ooh, I like that.
And have that premise be the guideline for maybe this business works for 2 or 3 years, and how do you fit in the evolutionary steps that come as we grow.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
interesting. And I wonder too if, we talk about small disturbances, and maybe that is adding, and maybe that is the slowing in consideration.
Mhm. Yeah, I wanted to just add, I understand how this works with larger organizations, right? And you can, kind of then have a little pocket of ingenuity and resilience, something new growing inside the old, and then,
Right.
eventually that kind of thing. But in the world of entrepreneurship, where most companies are micro companies from 1 to 4, and they really, I'd love to know what you think an analogy would be in a forest, let's say, because they're like one-hit wonders, right? Most small enterprises do one thing, or like a bunch of things. Like I had a dairy, so we made really great cheese, and we made cheese. But if there was no market for cheese, everything I have, like if suddenly cheese eating was not a thing, I can't make it resilient or disperse it into other places. Nobody wants cheese. So what would the life cycle look like for entrepreneurs? Is it really just about knowing when? Is there an animal or a plant that does this, where you just like, okay, this isn't working anymore, I'm packing up and going over here?
Well, they do have a diversity of strategies, and like in the cheese, if I was the animal that made cheese, you might be like, well, okay, here's the ingredients that I use, and so what else could be made with that? And maybe some members would have that alternate strategy so that when conditions changed, it was already present.
Okay.
Something like that.
What's the value of the cheese?
That's okay. And then this is what evolutionary design is all about, is, what's your nature, what's your context, what's your adaptation, and what's your role. That's what Harry's getting at, is, the role of a cheesemaker. What is that? Feeding people, taking care of the milk producers, that kind of thing. So that role might stay the same, but the form it takes might change.
Right.
The other dimension has to deal with what you mentioned earlier, Tamsin, in that slide of how things started from rock, lichen, and moss.
Mm.
So you starting off as an entrepreneur, you're starting off as a pioneer species. So you really have to be at that moment in what context, what steps you're taking, what will evolve from your steps that help grow to climax. So I think everybody that's coming up with something has to fit into the overall picture of who we are as a species and how our planet is going to benefit from that shift, so that we mitigate the risk of unintended consequences at the beginning by understanding those basic principles.
Yes, please.
Are you saying that, which I love, and sorry, my cat is speaking of species. My cat is always has to be on the keyboard. Are you like, this make sense? So are you saying like entrepreneurs' role in the economy, like not many people are entrepreneurs, right? So in Canada, we have 30 million people as waged workers, and only 2 or 3 million of them are independent, own their own company. So they're within that larger economic ecosystem. they are what? They are the, you know, the water between the rocks of institution and big corporations that kind of move all over the place. And if so, why do we teach people to be entrepreneurs as though they're going to grow big rocks someday? Maybe they're really, that's their role in the ecosystem, is to move between the rocks and, I don't know, create new things, or,
Yeah.
you know, pioneer species, like you say. And if that's the case, then entrepreneurs need to be trained that whatever business they start today is not going to last more than 4 or 5 years, because things change. And then their job is to know when that happens and move on to the next thing. They are.
Aren't you talking about kind of like mindsets? Like if you have a fixed mindset and you can't, yeah, I'm going to do this job, and then this is, my mind is set, I'm going to do this the rest of my life, versus I have these skills and I could do this with that skill, or I could do that with that skill. I mean, that's a little bit different way of thinking. It's a little more abstract, but it can allow a little less rigidity and a little more flexibility.
I sort of think of it as these giant corporations are like the redwood forest, where it's very efficient. They're good competitors. They block out the light. It's hard to get a start. But entrepreneurs, there's a diversity. It's more like the tropical rainforest, where you get a lot of little things, and everything is tied to everything else. And so it's this very diverse, lively thing. But yeah, I think you're absolutely right, is that entrepreneurs, like in my work, I try to focus on what is your essence, your nature, and your role. What was important to you? What's your purpose? Because then your work can reinvent itself, but your role stays the same and your nature stays the same.
So there's a cost to the reinvention. But like, look at ants. They do this task switching. Like when they're young, they do a certain task. When they get a little older, they do a different task. And as they age and move through the colony, they're doing different things. They're always switching, but so they have sort of this toolkit, and they're able to adapt very smoothly, between one task and another.
Entrepreneurship is not just about the individual or the individual organization. It's about the we that individual or that organization is part of.
Mm-hmm.
And we don't, I'll speak for this country, the United States, we are so individualistic that we don't always find a we that we are part of. And that doesn't mean we just accept everything, but it's working together, the human being able to do that.
Absolutely.
And that's a totally different way of thinking.
Yeah. And I like, humans are super organisms. We're like ants and bees, and we're not really individuals. We're part of super organisms. So life is efficient, but it has to optimize the whole system, not just itself. And that's different everywhere, right? Because it has to fit into Earth's operating system, which is unique to Earth, and it's also unique everywhere on Earth. So, and this is kind of, I think, the point is that we've got to align with our particular context, and that's how we surf for free. Otherwise, you're always fighting it. You're always putting in more energy and trying to make it be something it's not, and you're always trying to solve problems instead of work for potential and surf for free on what you already have available. So these complexity of these needs and constraints creates these creative trade-offs and collaborative alliances. So like for a tree, you can't move around and get the things you need. So you have to partner with, like we talked about, the animal dispersers or the mycelium underground, and that expands your capabilities. So living things have to partner up. They have to become more interdependent, and they also have to become more unique because of that interdependence. So the more unique they become as they're avoiding competition, the more valuable they are to others. And that's, I think, a good metaphor for our organizations as well, what we want them to become. And if you don't do that, and you don't have to do that, but if you don't, you'll get absorbed or you'll go extinct.
Mhm.
So here's an example of how that works. As you become more unique, as these species become more unique, they start partnering up and making exchanges. And here's your entrepreneur analogy. In the forest, you've got some species are fixing nitrogen in the soil, others are capturing sunlight. The fungal networks are dispersing nutrients and water, and the pollinators are pollinating, the dispersers are moving seeds around. You've got fertilizers and you have protectors. In Panama, you see a lot of the big trees partner with ants that are ferocious if something comes and tries to eat their fruit. And so you have these very intricate dances of all these species coming together, and you really need them all. You can't do everything yourself. So becoming uniquely irreplaceable, an irreplaceable partner in an essential exchange. And this is coral. So that's a partnership right there. You've got the algae is using sunlight to make the energy that the coral animal uses to produce the reef. And in the process of doing that, it creates waste that feeds the algae. So together they make this ecosystem, which is like the most productive ecosystem on Earth, right? And so you can think about it as how much would your disappearance affect others? And here in the coral, the algae are bleaching out, and so the coral animal is being forced to make a go of it on its own more and more, and it can't do it. So you can think about that in your own work, in your own entrepreneurial role, like how would your disappearance affect others, how influential you are, how uniquely irreplaceable. And then the other thing you think is if everybody's the same, it doesn't really matter if you disappear, So this kind of Walmart clone generic world, you can always get it cheaper somewhere else. And so then you become commodified. So I think this is important to know. So as we see, as these uniquenesses and interdependence grow, life creates conditions conducive to life. So this is these termite mounds again, and I love them because the little termites go out at night and they collect all these scraps of grasses and things that are not digestible or collectible to other organisms. And then they take them down into their mound and they feed their these fungal gardens that they have. And the fungus can actually break down fiber, which animals cannot do. So the fungus break that down, and in the process, the soil gets richer, grass grows, draws herbivores, they're fertilizing the soil, carnivores come, the carcasses are fertilizing the soil, and you get more and more and more. And then context matters. I actually saw this a couple weeks ago, striped basilisk. It actually literally runs across the water like this. But you can't do that everywhere, right? Context matters. And that's getting back to those unique operating conditions of Earth. And now, so adaptation, you've got to adapt to your context, right? This is another plant that we see in Panama all the time. And these guys, they're called walking palms, and they actually move so if the canopy closes, they'll actually kind of slowly over time move to where the opening is so that they can maintain that. And so those kind of trade-offs are or reconcilers are the way that life works. So this is how birds are so lightweight, but they have to be really strong. So bones have to be strong and lightweight. It's a trade-off. This is a software program that was developed, inspired by those bird bones, that to develop buildings and construction that uses less materials but remains strong. So life's restraints provoke transformations. And sometimes life stumbles into these whole new blue oceans of possibility. And you never know when that's going to happen, because here you go along your evolution and but only one thing might make it into the future, these catastrophic extinction events. And then a whole new world of possibility opens. So that is evolutionary design to me, is how can we get to this place? Okay, so let's take a minute. I'm going to ask you to just journal for, let's give it 5 minutes. So just journal on, what is your vision? What's in the way? And what is that obstacle preventing you from doing? So I'm going to give you 5 minutes. Krista, can you keep the time on that?
Absolutely.
All right, and then we'll share. So what is your vision, and what's in the way, and what is that obstacle preventing you from doing?
Okay, Dr. Tamsin.
All right. Okay. So can anybody want to share that? Ari, I'm hoping we can hear you now.
I don't know. Can you hear me?
Yes. What's your vision and what's in the way?
Oh, well, our vision is actually written for 2032 and it's 9 pages long.
And so
what's in the way is just the normal challenges of human existence on the planet.
Uh-huh.
So on the one hand, nothing big, and on the other hand, the same challenges that have been in front of people for eternity, plus climate change on top of that.
Yeah. Cheryl.
Tamsin? Yeah, I've got one that maybe we could work with. So the vision, I would say, is essentially, I'm working with a neighborhood, an art district, to, let's just say, defeat gentrification. And the obstacles in the way would be zoning codes, as well as political willpower and greed. What is it preventing? It's preventing the ability of the original lower income occupants of the neighborhood to stay, as well as the creative businesses and artists. It's preventing a unique, culturally sensitive neighborhood from thriving, with how it's changing. It's just moving to make it a very homogeneous neighborhood. So it's preventing diversity.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and what I will ask, what is the role historically of that neighborhood?
So historically, very affordable, very old housing stock, as well as, probably for 2 decades now, it has been an art district, and in a sense, not just galleries, almost more working studios or creative businesses, small entrepreneurial type of businesses that have always been there. There's very few, support services, because it's been kind of a quote unquote shady neighborhood, but it's within a mile of downtown, so very desirable now, one of the last ones. So not a lot of restaurants, just, a handful. So the vision, would be to maintain the unique, and it has a history, Chicano history in it, throughout the neighborhood. So we do have cultural institutions there, like Museo de las Americas, Su Teatro, that are anchors, but now it's like everything is being displaced. Right. So, how do we maintain that? Obviously, we have to allow for some change, but how do we, it kind of gets to that, what you were talking about, the adaptive cycle, and how can we find a way to work with that and maintain, but allow some change, but not just lose everything.
Yeah, and also, if looking at the bigger ecosystem of the city, like everyone should be invested in there being a diversity of strategies there, right? Because the art district probably is a source of novelty and disturbance. And so, but if all the districts have to compete against each other for the same efficiency resources, then like you say, it's being displaced. So that's a perfect example of how thinking more systemically about the ecosystem would change that. But also it makes you have the idea of who else would be invested in making it happen. Because it may not just be the poor artists and, the people trying to afford a home there. It could be the whole city is invested in that, if that can be brought to the fore. And again,
Right.
the more unique it becomes, the more that role is strengthened.
Because I was trying to think about, how could, working with them, how could we create small disturbances to release locked up potential? Because, and from the viewpoint of, kind of hierarchy, like the political and seeing, long term, just like you're saying, how this is really integral to what makes, this city a desirable place to be and places to visit.
Mhm.
Well, I can go. I find I probably haven't broken this down properly enough, right? But if the vision would be a gender just world, and then what's in the way, all kinds of things like patriarchy and racism and colonialism and all of white supremacy and so on. And then when I go into what are our obstacles in changing that, I would say that maybe funding change is an obstacle, because it's the people most affected by it are asked to fund it, but they are also the ones who are most affected by these things and don't have the kinds of funds that might be required to drive wholesale change. So I don't know if that makes sense, and that makes me think like, oh, what do I do about that? But it's kind of a big one.
Well, because, and again, it's sort of analogous to the forest, where the efficient, the established are crowding out new potential, but really the health of the forest is going to decline from that. So the whole forest should be invested in
Right.
having gender justice, right? And not only that, because we're a super organism, we need those diverse roles. Like if I think that if you can convert it to the community, or, realizing how they need that diversity, then you can shift the investment from those affected trying to stop something from happening, like a problem mentality, to what's the potential if we do differently. Because then you shift it to collective intelligence, and then you've got the guys that own the company going, oh my gosh, we need to do something about that. We're actually invested in this because it's affecting our adaptability and our innovation and our resilience. So then it becomes a positive thing of like, ooh, look how much potential we have on the table here.
Right.
And then people are invested in it. So what would have to be true for your obstacle to disappear? Think about that for a minute. Yeah, go ahead, Harry.
No, question number one was what's in the way, and now you have what would have to be true.
Yes.
So I'm going to make it be me.
Okay.
What's in the way is me.
Uh-huh.
And what would have to be true is being honest about making that change that comes with inside of me, that comes from the basic principle of how we can get the rest of humanity to adjust to being nature, so that we could have that symbiotic relationship with the rest of the species. And I'm specifically addressing a piece of real estate that Cheryl was talking about, that we have a piece of property in the family that was put on the market and handed over to different brokers. And I just kept getting feedback based on the principles of how the markets behave, is what could we do to get the most dollar amount for that piece of property? There was no creativity in that process. And I kept saying, don't you have any other access to other people who would just want to like tear it down and build another condo building? they don't have that mechanism to make that change or to be participating in that creative process.
Mhm.
So then it was incumbent upon me to kind of start looking about what I can do about doing that. But I do want to say that one of the people that came back who were interested in the property found out that our property was landmarked, and we never knew about that.
Hmm.
That was a new piece of information for me that I was happy, because I was always focused on adaptive reuse of the same property. And I did some further analysis, and I found out that this building, although built in 1928, there was nothing there before that. The land was the land as it was when it was created.
Mhm.
And the neighborhood, being in the tri-state area, was originally lived on by the Lenape tribe. So that was the communication from the land that came to me, and I got in touch with them. I'm actually meeting with them on Monday to
Wow,
see what other options are available.
how cool.
So it's about synergy and synchronicity
Mhm.
that became more visible to me,
Mhm.
and what options we actually have on how to maximize on a challenge that is always outside of whatever we were trained to think, and how our education got us here. So that's where my story is at this moment, that it wasn't about the highest bidder. It was about what will actually happen to the land now.
Interesting. And that brings up to me that when you had a breakthrough with it is when you started looking at the nature of that place. Like,
Yeah.
what is the history? What is the nature of this place? What does it want to be? What's the role it's historically played? And then you start to see um, well, who else would be invested in it. And that's my point, is like, that's with evolutionary design. When you start thinking about, well, who else would be invested in that potential manifesting, then suddenly it changes the whole what you can do.
And from that moment, the visions just kept becoming clearer and clearer. And now it's anchoring that vision to see how it can evolve.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a story of, Randy and I have a relationship that goes way back, and as architects, that's what we come to the table with, is vision,
Uh-huh.
and then being able to adapt or channel that vision in a way that is in alignment with the work that we're doing now.
I love it. Well, this is a tree that is in Mammonie, where I work, and we have a lot of really crazy cool trees out there. But this is just to show like how the different kinds of roles, like not everybody can get to the sunlight. So there's other ways to do it. There's vines, there's epiphytes, there's parasitic strategies, all kinds of things, and they're all required. So when we start thinking evolutionarily like this, we can expand what's possible by thinking about potential instead of little patches for problems that we're dealing with. I'm going to transition now into superorganisms. And so I wanted to say, here we have these ecosystems, but how does nature achieve the resilience so that when disturbances are happening, it can still continue to operate and maintain itself? Not to get back to some baseline. I'm not talking about restoration. I'm talking about the capacity to keep evolving. So, how do they do it? These are the kind of patterns that we see in living systems that are resilient. So they use modular variety and diversity, not just the diversity, but a variety of, different kinds of players. They do redundant functions. So they'll do the same things in different ways. They do multi-purpose design. So one design will do a lot of different things. And then these small periodic disturbances that we talked about that remove blockages or buildups and keep the system healthy. And then investing in trusted relationships for reliable supply, like with the coral, if you can get your partner real close and that exchange is real tight, you've got a nice thing going, provided that the humans don't wreck the planet. And then you want to be alert and prepared. So sense and response, you've always got to be attuned to your local environment and change. And then this potential oriented design is continually growing the options and possibilities and capabilities for the future. So these are the general patterns that life uses to stay resilient. And that brings me to the superorganisms. These are like ants, honeybees, slime molds, even I include. So technically, those don't fit the definition. The slime mold doesn't fit the definition of a superorganism. But the way I see them is when diverse individuals share a purpose and take on different roles, and you've got multiple generations of individuals helping raise the next generation, that's a superorganism. So if they have gone with more eyes and more ears, they are more alert and prepared. They invest in trusted relationships, these symbiotic relationships with other species, but also they completely fundamentally rely on each other. It takes a village. They're modular, they work in teams, and they do a variety of things. And so like when we see, like in a wasp colony, the queen actually, she creates the hive's entire workforce. And then the social wasp queens will actually eat their first eggs so that they can get the strength to create their next workers who eat their next eggs. So it's all coming from her. And she's the only one that reproduces. So if she dies, the colony has no purpose. It cannot reproduce itself. So all these different workers have taken on different roles, unique different roles to support the colony in its collective reproduction. And it's not a clone army. We have this idea that, ants is a clone army. But in reality, no two individuals are alike. And in fact, statistically, you can't group them in any way. There are, like we talk about caste system, but it's really not like that. They are actually quite different from each other. It's not just you sign up for this job and that's your job. So the sum of all these contributions done by individuals with different perspectives and skills and talents, just like us, yields the collective intelligence that the whole colony depends on. So anyone can make a difference. They are creative individuals. I've talked to ant researchers that claim they can identify individual ants by their behavior. They're that different. Some are spazzy. Some of them cheat. There's some that will just wait by a rock by the entrance, and then when another ant comes with something, they'll actually take it and take it down. Like so they're not that different from us. So members share a strong purpose, each makes a unique contribution, and diversity is the source of their success. It's like an insurance policy, that resilience piece. The members are pooling their costs and benefits and sharing work and wealth, and their specialization and sharing expands the range of their capabilities, and that extends to their symbiotic relationships. Like the termites or leafcutter ants can't digest cellulose fiber, so they partner with bacteria and mycelium that can. So that expands the range of their capabilities. And of course, people are really good at this. So this is a really cool framework that I've been recently working on. This is superorganisms. So here we were talking about that decentralized identity, like they're all working for the colony's collective reproduction. So only the queen does it, and they all support her. So it's a decentralized identity. And what they do is they go like we were talking about with those termites, they go out into the environment and they collect little bits of things. So bees are collecting little specks of pollen, and the ants are collecting little seeds or little scraps of this and that. And so then they bring them together and they actually partner with other organisms symbiotically to upcycle the value. So like we were saying, the termites are partnering with the mycelium and the bacteria. The bees are partnering with bacteria, but also with the flowers themselves. And they all do that. So they do this, they concentrated upcycling, and how they're doing it is through individuals, unique individuals that are doing their own thing. So this collective intelligence emerges where everyone's diverse, independent, and connected. And that emerges into greater intelligence than they would have on their own. Each one is the swarm creativity. Each one is doing a job that in their own way, their own thing, they're independent. And so then what happens is, so these are these particulate raw resources that they're collecting. So here they go, they collect those resources. The different teams are doing different activities with those materials. The collective intelligence is, independence. And then they upcycle these materials, and that actually replenishes the raw resources that they need. So like the bees are pollinating the flowers they depend on for honey. And the the termites are improving the soil by gathering these scraps and converting them. And so that is continuing the cycle. So they have to feed themselves, and all organisms are doing this, but this is the particular way that superorganisms do it. So I want to give you a little bit more background on this framework. So this inner circle here is you, or your colony, your organization. And this middle circle is the work you do, or your projects, your endeavors. And that can be your organization's endeavors. And then this wider circle is the environment that you're working in. So that can be your social environment, your physical environment, all of those things. And it can also be the future. So it's just a wider sphere. So you're getting these materials and returning them in the wider sphere, but your operations are here and the reproduction occurs here. So this is what superorganisms do. They have that general pattern, and it doesn't matter what kind. They all do some variation on that. So by helping and sharing in a bounded commons of trusted relationships, superorganisms collectively cultivate a reliable, growing, evolving set of extended capabilities and resources. So what that enables them to do is have what they need fresh and on demand all the time, which is pretty crazy. It's pretty cool. And, with humans, we are a superorganism species. And what we do is we invest in the different trees on our land, the different plants, and And so we always have those fresh and on demand. Those are relationships that we invest in that give us that extended capability. And it feeds a whole ecosystem. It improves the environment our offspring collectively inhabit. And it increases the future potential that they inherit. And actually, I wanted to say, I include the mycelium as a superorganism because these are unique individuals genetically, and they share their cell walls. And what they do is they gather these scraps of nutrients and water in the environment, and they bring it to the trees, support this whole ecosystem that feeds them. Perfect example. So a superorganism is a community of diverse and independent individuals that share an identity and purpose and grow collective value in a common nexus of trusted relationships. So that's us, right? We do that. Here's one of my favorite superorganisms, slime mold. And so I like this because it also shows this potential-oriented evolutionary design where they don't know what they don't know, and they don't know what's out there. So they just go along and they're just searching. They have these generalized search features. It's almost like the adaptive system, where they kind of slowly branch out and search. But then when they find something, they go, oh, yeah, they climb on. So they have both strategies. They can be efficient and they can be opportunistic. And sometimes they stumble on blue ocean and a whole new potential opens up for them. So it's a fractal pattern. So superorganisms don't restructure. All this top-down planning that we do, they don't do it. Their modular teams just divide, multiply, grow, and develop to meet opportunities and threats the same way cells in your body do. No one has to tell them what to do. And the reason is because the strategy they use is the structure itself. It's this. So they design their organizations this way, so they're always prepared and alert and able to specialize on whatever opportunity comes their way. So yeah, ants and honeybees don't tell each other what to do. The members just make small, imperfect decisions constantly based on their own diverse perspectives and expertise and style, and they course correct constantly. So if one does something badly or not the greatest idea, another one comes along and does it differently, and it just over time gets to the result that they desire. You can see, well, one, you can see that we're a superorganism. We have this kind of strange, intelligent design to our work that you can, it's just a pattern that we have. But then here's these leafcutter ants, 0 hours stopped in traffic. But for us, 70 million hours stopped in traffic in the Netherlands last year. So we are a superorganism. We have the same potential as these other superorganisms, but we're being blockheads about it. So let's see if we can align with the way other superorganisms do things and unlock that potential. So here, just to show that we are superorganisms as well. Our closest relatives are chimpanzees and bonobos, and we share their cleverness and the empathy that they have. But where we differ is that somewhere along the way, we became a superorganism. So we've had a qualitative shift in our social structure and our social strategy. So where a chimpanzee mother takes care of her offspring all by herself all the time, humans, half of our childcare on average is done by someone that's not related to us, which is bizarre in the animal kingdom. I mean, really only superorganisms do that. It's diagnostic. And to the extent where we have grandmothers that are non-reproductive that have extended lives because we need them. And people that don't have any interest in having children are just as much contributors to our communities. So reproductive success is a little different for us because we're superorganism. It's our colony, not ourselves. And I think that people really need to know this because it's really foundational to our strategy. So what is preventing your superorganism from operating effectively? And, these are some of the things that we see. And so does anyone want to talk about that? Where do you see these things in your organization? And where is your superorganism floundering?
Dr. Tamsin,
Yeah.
I keep coming back to Cabby, the disruptive fashion company, and how they have really succeeded at creating their small entrepreneurial company into a superorganism. Truthfully, I had the pleasure of working with them on the inside for 3 years and as a stylist, and they've got the distributed leadership, they've got the shared purpose for sure, swarm creativity. There's nothing stopping this company except for now supply chain. So you hit a roadblock when you come up against another system that isn't keeping up.
Yeah, and in fact, that's making me think of going back this. You know, Cabby has all these parts to it, but are there particulate raw resources? Are they replenishing the resources that they rely on? So this could be something for their evolution where they start to link these two more consciously.
That's exactly right. Yeah, the fashion industry is not keeping up with that part of the thing. So when you're cooperating with this other structure, the supply chain, the manufacturing, etc., they don't have that yet, and so the partnership is that's the limitation on Cabby's growth at this point.
Right. And I think there's a lot of potential in this, because then you start saying, well, given our mission or our direction, our values, in a way, the way that we do things, how could we link these two to feed ourselves in a way that's consistent with that? So that becomes one more lens to become more unique and more irreplaceable. So this is that's really critical for your evolution as an organization.
Yeah, so thinking about buildings, right? We design them not to be quote unquote upcycled. What does that mean for buildings? We don't design them to be converted. Well, yeah, we don't design them to be converted back into raw resources, at least not in any sort of cognitive way. We can demolish them, but it's incredibly expensive to, it's not feasible to extract, well, so far, any value out of those, or much value out of those. You've got a big concrete building full of rebar, you go in there with a wrecking ball and you just got a pile of rubble. And okay, you could take that rubble and maybe make a road, and we're learning about that. I think, we're finding ways to reuse these resources, but hey, it's not efficient.
Okay, a beetle does all the things that this K-cup does, but it's all made of the same materials. So if you take it apart, it comes down to these universal building blocks that, amino acids and things that can be made into things again. And that's the whole way that life works. And so that makes you think about buildings and how they can be more modular and assembling like that. I don't know, that's what comes to my mind. So in these superorganisms, the workers are self-organizing in response to local conditions in real time. So all they're really doing is sharing a vision, which is reproduce the colony, and some simple principles that are derived from that. Like it's pretty much little if-then rules that grow or decay over time, and that triggers these shifts. So they can, as long as they have this culture of diverse experimentation and sharing, they can trust the wisdom of the crowd. And, in a lot of ant colonies, 40% of the ants do nothing. But that's, a resilience measure. And that's like a reserve labor force that's always ready to go into action. So they can tolerate a lot of inefficiency. But maybe we can't. We can try. So in humans, here we have, we're superorganisms, but we are falling far short of our potential. So why is that? And this gets back to that. Why do we need to copy other creatures? If we're nature, and it's because we rely on culture to maintain our superorganisms. We don't use pheromones. We use culture. So that's a body of shared local knowledge and practice. And it has to be renewed from one generation to the next. And if we have it, we can get by in the world with no claws, fangs, or fur. But if we don't have it, we really don't. We're kind of weak, little puny things. So what's happened is that we've scaled up our world into this generic mess gotten away from our superorganisms. So we don't even know where our superorganisms are. We don't have any kind of boundaries or collectives that way. Not, most of us don't. And yet, here we're doing this stuff, and you don't know if there's a parasite coming in. You don't know that the other individuals share your purpose. We've really destroyed the whole structure, as well as the processes. I'll come back to that. But it's our culture and our conscious evolution. That's really the human trick, is this conscious evolution, is that we can imagine things that we want to have happen, and we can create them, right? Like, what's your vision? What's your obstacle? We can do that kind of work. But it really relies on regenerating these cultures that maintain our superorganisms. So what does that conscious evolution require? Well, it requires agency. We have to have freedom to question and experiment and try things and be ourselves. You've got to care what happens, and you have to believe that it can happen, that's worth happening. That clarity and strength of purpose and values is what holds it all together. And then imagination, just imagining something different than what we have. So where are these things lacking in your organization or industry, and how might you increase them?
So here's the thing I'm running into. We've got engineers and architects, and we have this whole structure of education and accreditation and so on and so forth, right? Licensing, right? And this is sort of a self-feeding system. You can't become an architect unless you've gone to school and kind of gone through the gauntlet of things. And you can't become an engineer unless you do this, that, and the other thing. And and everybody wants to change, but it's like this big immutable circle of educators and practitioners and institutions, right? So that agency, I mean, how do you question that? A lot of it's built into law, right? So the agency to question an experiment just isn't there. It's like, I can't build a house out of mud, right?
Yeah.
I mean, there's this case, this architect in New Mexico who got drummed out because he was, because of the way he was doing things. He was building neighborhoods where you couldn't build neighborhoods, right? He was doing it in a way that didn't comply, but it was, perfectly technically great. It was genius, but he couldn't do it. So he's gone elsewhere, right? Where he can. So that's one solution, is go somewhere else. Right?
I want to pick up on that, say I love that example, because I feel what's kind of more broadly holding us back from imagining a whole new world is the existing systems that make it so hard to go outside of that. So we have this rigidity built into everything, right? Whether it's business, architecture, et cetera. So we have all of that. And then why those things are there. Sometimes it's for our good, maybe, but it's also not there for our good because they are so immutable, as you say. And I think what conscious evolution requires is that agency as kind of a first step, because I feel as though and I worked in corporate environments for 18 years, you're not allowed to imagine or question very much. You can't walk into a boardroom and say, I'm not so sure about capitalism anymore. You'd be laughed out of the room. And I think it's unhealthy. We immediately assume that other types of economic systems which exist on the planet in a very myriad of forms are summarily not, don't have anything to teach us. And I don't know how to, so we kind of lack imagination because we don't have the agency or freedom to question and experiment, which leads to less hope and care. So yeah, I think it all has to stem with agency. And then how do you do that? And I sometimes feel like the reason people become entrepreneurs is precisely for that reason. If you have any agency, it's because you work for yourself, and at least it gives you more. It's not total agency, but it gives you more than you might otherwise have when you're concerned you might get fired for your crazy viewpoints. So yeah, I don't know, that's conscious evolution requires, maybe there's an order to this and it requires it. And it's frustrating to imagine how much agency we give up just to put food on the table.
Oh, it's so true. I mean, I would say that is why I work with entrepreneurs, and that is why I am an entrepreneur. And also, just like my personal purpose in life is, I like to say my motto is liberating creative forces from the tutelage of authoritative power.
I'm going to write that one down.
Yeah. Good one. Because it always comes back to that. It's like, just let me do my thing.
Yeah, well, it's holding us back, I think, because people can't even imagine, most
That's
of
right.
you, I don't know there's anyone here from Canada, but we're embroiled in our trucker convoy thing going on here. And part of the frustration is that people are hurting, but they don't have imagination to know what could be. They just want to express that they're hurting. And yeah, I find that, that's, I guess, the big question of
Yeah.
all
And
of us.
I think it comes back to potential oriented design as well. Is that, if we have this problem mentality, it's like, I don't like that, I'm against that. But it's like, well, how might we? Yes. And so I think, my own role, I think, is to try to put this in another way so that people can find another approach. And because we're eroding our creative thinking, our critical skills, like imagination, all sorts of things are eroding. Here's our little bees collecting their pollen. And so here is the 5 teaming patterns that I've seen in superorganisms. That my teaming goes into these more in depth. But what I want to bring up is that it's a cultural thing. So if you've got to have this collective intelligence and this swarm creativity, you have to have sharing and reciprocity. You've got to know that you have a shared trust, that you share the purpose. And then this, the regenerative hubs that we talked about, of them replenishing the raw resources they need. But it comes back to this distributed leadership where they have to maintain this culture. They have to maintain sharing and reciprocity and all of the conditions that they need. And so they do that in this distributed way, where they're continually, like 1/3 of the ants are leaders, and they're not telling others what to do, but they're more active and they're roaming around and they're looking at patterns and they're sharing it with their little feelers with each other. And that holds the colony together. They're taking that, the pheromones from the queen, and they're distributing it through the colony. So it's spreading identity and shared purpose. And they're all going around all the time looking for parasites and maintaining this. We don't do that. We've lost the structures, where we don't even know who's in and who's out. And, of course, we're plagued with parasites trying to get in, and all the things. But so trust is, I think, really critical. And it's not just trust in that I know and like you, but it's that you are a good partner. Like, you're complementary in your skills, you're capable, you can actually fill the role, and that you're reliable, so that I can have that fresh on-demand resource that you bring me. So like the coral, like we saw them becoming more and more bound. That's a biological phenomenon right there. And that kind of symbiosis emerges from our shared future, just the fact of us sharing the future. So what I do want to show you this. I'm going to skip to this and then we'll go back. So I think this is cool. It might boggle your mind a little bit. Oh, come on. Okay. So here we have this healthy superorganism that we saw with the, the connection here, that. But so what happens if a parasite comes in and infiltrates the colony? Well, here the queen, so this is what usually happens. They'll deceive, they operate through deception. So they sneak into the colony by mimicking the colony's scent. So for instance, there's a spider that mimics the scent of the ant's larvae. So when they're coming along, they go, oh, why is our larvae out here? Let's take that back down to the nest. So they take this spider down into the nest. They don't see very well. So it smells like an egg, larvae. And then of course the spider wakes up and eats all the larvae. A lot of superorganisms specialize in parasitizing other superorganisms. So like in ants, you'll get the queen will mimic the scent, sneak into the colony, and then glom onto the queen, and then actually take on her role so that the other ants will feed her and take care of her and take care of her eggs and all the things, but they're not serving their superorganism anymore. They're serving this parasite. And so what happens when they do that? The first thing is the parasite is using the host labor. So they've lost their swarm creativity. The parasite is directing the host labor. So it's no longer autonomous and free, right? And so when that happens, the host labor is gathering these raw resources and then giving them to the parasite. So you can see this is a lot less complex than it was. But then what happens is collective intelligence gets cut out completely. So we're no longer asking all the individuals to contribute their own expertise and style and perspective. So you've lost the diversity. And then you're no longer upcycling and concentrating. You're no longer doing that. So you get this accumulating waste. Sound familiar? And then because that is not getting upcycled into the raw resources, you start running out of the raw resources. Sound familiar? And then, of course, the superorganism, it just has no meaning, no purpose. It's not serving any kind of real meaning or purpose. And so once the queen is taken out, they really have no meaning in their lives. So let me ask you, what are the implications? Is it just me? Go ahead.
Oh my God, there's so much here. I have to jump right in and say, first of all, the parasite part of the diagram to me reminds me of the Walking Dead world.
Yeah.
And I mean, to me, that's capitalism. Parasite could be as a venture capitalist space, and so using a lot of host labor, government support, citizen support. We all contribute to creating spaces that make doing business possible by raising our children to be, follow the rules and doing all these things. And that's labor that, someone is extracting to feed themselves and then accumulating all of this extra waste, which everybody else has to deal with. I know I'm not saying that quite, but I could see at a systemic level, at an organization level, and even at a personal level, how this diagram could be used to explain why things are the way they are.
Yeah. And then what happens with these parasites? They just move on. So they've consumed this colony and its resources, they move on.
I heard a talk yesterday from Vandana Shiva, whom I'm sure you recognize him. At this excellent presentation here, this last diagram says to me, because she was talking about Bill Gates and the corporations, but they're just zeroing on Bill Gates and he's focused on food and seed, and he is technically destroying, literally, not technically, literally destroying what indigenous communities know about farming and about the seed, et cetera, et cetera. So this is a great, wow, thank you.
Yeah, it was an aha for me too.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was on that call too, Gloria, and she
Oh,
was,
good, Harry.
and what I recognize a parasite to be is actually a teacher, so to speak, that we now have options as to how to respond. And it's
Mhm.
just now to gather the momentum for the
Mhm.
swarm activity to actually take hold, and restore that relationship lines that the healthy superorganism can be. So
Mhm.
if you look at a parasite, even though it's negative, there's a positive outcome if we understand the stop sign and what to do when we get to that corner. And it's like I think that's a very different perspective of looking, instead of being fearful of one, just to say thank you for letting us know this. It's kind of like seeing, walking into a dark room and you don't know where you are, but you have to flip the switch on to see what's actually happening.
Mhm.
And the kind of conversation we had yesterday with Venedenda is that notion of she flipped the switch and we can see the
Right.
noise and the parasite that's happening.
Mhm.
So I think that's a healthy sign for a superorganism to recognize and respond accordingly.
Mhm.
Mhm.
Yeah,
I
'cause
agree.
most of
Thank
the
you.
time we don't know that we're
Yeah.
parasitized. It's kind of a eye opener.
Mhm.
But in nature, does that happen? I'm thinking of a Walking Dead zombie who's run by a parasite, but there is no turning back.
Right. Yeah, no, the colony really can't shake itself, but there's lots of colonies and they do have resistance strategies. It's weird, but they terminate the parasite's female offspring. I don't know if we're taking the metaphor too far, but
Now we're talking about Margaret Atwood.
but so what I think is interesting, I think about this, like so what could we do about it? And what's interesting is when you look at parasites, like let's say HIV exists in monkeys, but it doesn't harm them. It's just there. And so, and it's actually become assimilated into their DNA, and you can find the signature there. So they were infected by it in the past, but now because they share a purpose, as in you've got to keep your host alive, they've actually become, part of the organism. And so as time goes by, if you share that purpose enough, you do become, you reconcile it. There's a reconciler. So that may be possible. And then I think, can we just reinvent capitalism? Can we reinvent this?
Mhm.
And I think that maybe entrepreneurs is a key ingredient in that. So collective intelligence. This is that, individuals are diverse and independent and they self-organize.
Okay.
They share a purpose and identity, but they're basically self-organizing around it. So they're doing multiple parallel low investment experiments according to their own perspective. And they maintain these open, always on conversations. So like the honeybees have this waggle dance floor that they're using, and ants use their pheromone trails. They have these things. And then they use these simple if-then rules to trigger these tipping point strategic shifts. So they can have like a population of different rules that are diverse, and some work better than others, and the whole strategy will flip with no one telling them what to do. So how might you activate collective intelligence? And I sort of decided that this is where this is one place that the parasitic condition can be shifted, is because this is the first thing to get cut off, right? The collective intelligence when the parasite comes in. So if we can fight these things, maybe we can maintain healthy superorganisms.
Yeah, I just think what jumps out for me is in terms of if I had to pick one thing that activating collective intelligence is maybe a precondition for some of the other stuff, I'm not sure, is the psychological safety and belonging side. I mean, it's so hard to get people to open up or question or all of those things. If you don't have that, there's just not the, or they open up just a wee bit, but it's not enough to unleash the potential and the collective intelligence that's there. So yeah, you can offer, I've seen this in organizations where they say, hey, we're going to be a learning organization. We're going to do all this, but it's not safe to do that. And
That's right.
everybody just retreats into spouting what they know they are supposed to say.
That's right. Yeah. And then you're just going through the motions. Oh, great. A team building exercise.
Yeah.
Oh, great. A retreat.
Yeah, exactly.
Is it possible to think of all of us looking at each other on this Zoom that we fit the bill to be that team?
You could be.
Could be.
So I think that starts the conversation, and recognizing that we're all here on this Zoom and collectively we're interested and we're searching at the same time we're discussing this, and recognize that if we did become a group, we would have the capacity to potentially get through the what separates us.
Well, that's what I'm hoping. I mean, that's this Team Lab membership. I'm hoping that people come for this, every month, and we can really start developing a cohort and really start making some of these differences. My hope.
Yeah, I mean, I think what would be necessary then too, though, in that cohort kind of space is cultivating that safety and belonging, and and spending the time, because I would say I don't know anybody here.
Exactly.
So I might not be able, like, I would certainly self-censor because I don't know.
Sure.
Now, the good news is I don't know anybody here, so I don't feel like there's a power of someone that, how when you're in some circumstances, there's people in your ecosystem there and you're in this session and you're like, well, that person has the power to maybe cut me out of the next conversation. So maybe I better not say that out loud, that kind of thing.
Yeah. Yeah. And that always, like, you're always trying to see like, what's normal in this group. And so that keeps you quiet until you know what normal is. And then when you find out what normal is, that might keep you quiet. So yeah, I think that's really important. I didn't do that here because I felt like I kind of knew everybody, but I usually try to make an effort to be really weird and inefficient right in the beginning to establish that we're just being weird here. We're going to try something new. We don't know what we don't know yet.
Right.
That's good. And here I was talking about that distributed leadership. So, they're spreading social unity there, and what they do too is they suppress dominance and inequity, and I think that's really important in our superorganisms, because it really does come down to trust in equitable sharing. Is the work I'm doing of equal value? Am I getting the same worth? Are we all because if your colony's parasitized and you're doing all this work but only the queen is benefiting, then you start sabotaging her female offspring. And so what these some of the individuals, like in a honeybee hive, some will produce fertile eggs, and so the other individuals are going around removing them. So it's a distributed leadership. It's a distributed way of maintaining that equity. And so, this idea of like one leader maintaining that, it's something that we all need to do. And so I think that's a structural thing that could be changed as well. So what prevents us from doing that? And how might you activate it? Does anybody see any of those things? Have you been in a situation like where, you could do all these things if everybody stepped up, but they don't have there's no reason for them to.
There's a lack of trust. And also, I think another problem is that there is people they want the power, so this prevents the distributed leadership.
Uh-huh. Oh, you mean that it's not even allowed? That's true.
Yeah, yeah.
That's super true. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yes. And to, you know, like the belonging and the interest, like you just don't, you're not invested in that.
Mhm.
So,
I
yeah, go
I
ahead.
want to throw out one other thing that might prevent it, or I run a community of 150 people, you know, feminist entrepreneurs, and we try to run the community in a distributed leadership way, right?
Mhm.
So it's kind of it's not like a person runs the community or anything like that. But what I find prevents it is you have to have a ownership agency, shared purpose. You really have to spend time with people, and people want to race in and out of stuff. Like they feel, I feel like there's like a quick hit kind of dimension to it, and then to build trust, belonging, shared purpose is not something you just do on a set of slides. And so, you know, in my own community sense, I've tried that. I've held AGMs. I tried, you know, encouraging people. I paid people to be feminist entrepreneurs of the month, to kind of engender all of that. But I find it really hard unless, I don't know, I haven't quite cracked the nut yet, but I feel like it means commitment and time. Like you can't belong to 57 communities. You can probably only, if this is the type of community it is and not typed down, you could probably only handle so many in your life. I don't know if that makes sense, but
Totally.
yeah.
Well, that's, I mean, I studied baboons, and the gelada baboons, based on the size of their brain and the size of their group, you can predict group size for different species.
Oh, really?
And so in humans, it's 150. We can, based on the size of our brain, we can only keep track of 150 relationships for, you know, trust relationship. So we do have a finite ability to manage that. And I think that what you're getting at too, it comes out in the evolutionary design, potential oriented design, is you start going, well, people need to be actually invested. They actually need to care, like not just care like I think it's a good idea and I want to surf that wave to get my own benefit, but they have to really care about the purpose in a deep way that, like you say, it comes to time and repeated interactions. But if you don't care, I mean, how many groups have you been in where people are like, oh my God, let's do that thing, and then half of them are gone? And it's not their fault. It's just that I think that we don't frame the structure right. There's just you know, if we start thinking in these nested systems, you start to see that I need to invest in my context to make that happen. So that sort of provides an avenue, but we're just not structured that way, and people don't think that way. Carol Sanford, she's cool. She works on stakeholder capitalism, but it's that idea of when you get further out, how can you find people that are invested in your purpose that you can serve for free on that? And I like, she has this culture tetrad. And I thought this was useful, like to think about these 4 things in your organization and think about, because it highlights things that are unspoken. And I think coming into organizations, this can be a good starting place to kind of show a mirror to things that they take for granted or they just don't notice. Does anyone want to speak to any of those?
Yeah, so I have this group that I work with, and some of the people are academics and some people are non-academics. You know, they actually do work. And I think one of the habits I noticed with the academics is that they don't really recognize anything outside their little sphere of expertise.
Mhm.
And they also tend to want to make the group their own. That is, that their purpose is, become the purpose of everybody, right? And it's like they can't get out of that.
Mhm.
And so the academics sort of bicker among themselves about
A term.
whose thing it is, and the practitioners are like, I could care less. This is not my thing. So yeah, and it's like there really isn't any. So starting with the recognition of this is a thing in this culture. There's and so I think is a really interesting question of how do you build that culture, respecting that people are coming from different places and they have their own thing, and that's kind of what it's all about. Bring your thing.
Mhm.
And
There's
that, but also coexist with all these other things, right?
Mhm.
That's the culture,
Yeah.
sort of a culture of coexistence, right?
Well, I mean, for me, like I was an academic for many years. I taught anthropology, physical anthropology at NYU and human genetics. But I got out of academics because it was so rigid. I couldn't think my thoughts. I was prohibited from thinking some of my thoughts. And some avenues are just not accessible. And so like it's only now that I can bring everything together and be a whole person in my work. But I feel like I'm still doing the research, but not as an academic.
Yeah, academia is the most siloed educational system out there. They're not interacting past the room that you're in.
Oh my God, yeah. I mean, they'll just argue about a term for an hour. Definition. And I'm like, oh, a superorganism is a blah, blah, blah. wait.
The same thing happens in architecture too. It's
absolutely.
Like in architecture, there's one building and then there's the business building just across the way, and there's no interaction between business and architecture. So you leave architecture school and you go, what do I do now?
Uh-huh. Well, I just did a workshop for YPO, Young Presidents Organization, and EO. And they all had MBAs. And I was telling them, if I had my way, your MBA, you would get it in the biology department. And your economy degree, you would get it in the biology department. All of your degrees, you would get in the biology department because we're biological animals first. And I think that would change everything.
That actually happened to my son. He was recruited by BCG while he was still in academia in material science. And he was recruited into the business world because the MBAs don't have any systemic thinking.
Right.
So they actually applauded him to come in. And now in his first year, he was like leading some groups because of the systemic approach, which is lacking from capitalism. That's the key underpinning that failed.
And I would say it's lacking in science too.
Yes.
I mean,
yes.
Yeah. Which is kills. All right. Oh, we did the parasite.
Yeah.
They were.
I have an MBA and I can attest to that.
But these guys, this was in Panama. They're all just looking at me like, what? My MBA and the yeah. So what would have to change? Really, this is the end. We can just have how might we align our designs with life so that we can surf for free and liberate creative forces from the tutelage of power and authority. So tiresome. I'm in the process of acquiring this ranch. Cheryl's been there. It's out in Borrego Springs, very remote wilderness area bounding the Anza-Borrego Desert State Park down by the border, Mexican border. And so I've been doing these this campfire conversations where they're just free and I just talk, because I do all these crazy things. Like I just starred in a Netflix documentary. Yeah, it's like it had a $2 million budget, and we went down this wild river through the sovereign territory of the Hoona people. And it was me and this indigenous climate warrior woman who was just badass. And it was just great. But those are the kind of things that I just want to share, and I don't really have a forum for that. So I have these campfire conversations so you can kind of see what I do as a human animal. So the next one, I'm not sure when the next one is. Krista, do you know? Anyway, we do them twice a month as my schedule allows. But you're always welcome to drop into those. And then we'll do another one of these March 12th. I'll do these once a month. And they'll be, more in depth and different things, and depending on what people's, questions are and what their pursuits are. But the idea is that this will be a membership and a cohort, and like I say, I write a lot. I have a lot of materials that no one ever gets to see. Teaming was like 1,500 pages. So no one's ever seen the other 1,200. So I'm going to put them in the membership, and they're going to be there. Like we're going to have all kinds of resources. And then as I create this book, I want to get feedback and stuff like that. So I hope you've enjoyed this. I hope it's been interesting. Yeah. Oh, good. Yeah. So let's just chat. Any questions? Anything at all?
I'm just wondering, like, if in this conversation, like the role of growth, right? Like so what? Just thinking about that, the role of growth in an organism. Like, are the ant colonies always the same size, or do they reach a maximum point at which growing any further would be bad, or what is the growth journey of these?
Such a good question. That's a great question. So it's interesting, but like superorganisms have life cycles just like organisms. So like termite mounds in Botswana, some of them are 2,000 years old, but they go, they reach a point where the amount of resources needed to sustain the colony would require too much distance to be traveled. And so then at that point, that triggers the neutral queens to begin new colonies. So they have a certain size, and they have a life cycle. And I think that that's really getting at something important, because with this generic global scale up thing that we have, we've lost all that structure. In your body, you're not one cell, one giant cell. You're like a bunch of cells, and cells are like this. Because that's the optimal size to run the system of a cell, including the communication and all of that. So it just, if you look at human communities, we can really only manage 150 people on a political level. So we have these small networks, but yet, and they're place sourced, right? Like they are in real places. They aren't in virtual reality somewhere. And so how can we get back to that? How can we stitch these superorganisms back to the land in a way that is commensurate with our actual architecture? That we just traveled down this river in the Huniala, and they fought a revolution to keep people out, and so that they can manage their own commons and all those trusted relationships that they have with ancient trees and ancient plants, that they rely on. And so I think about that, start a revolution, baby. I don't know, but I came out of that, the river shot me out, and I was radicalized. I did almost drown, so that might have had something to do with it.
Radical, the root of that word means root.
Uh-huh.
Right. return to sort of the root of what's the root of the problem. You know, you think about a community size,
Mhm.
but also what is it? What does that word place mean? What is a place?
Mhm.
1,000 years ago, a place was, you know, you're in the woods, but now with technology, places are different. Our place now in this culture, in our Western culture, is the globe. What can you change? Really? You know, you cannot change our genetics. You can't change the fact that, you know, 150 people or so is it for us. But what can we change? I think there's a lot of options there, but we do need to get back to the root. We do need to think maybe radical thoughts.
Like Regenesis is always talking about, oh no, you have to, it has to be oriented to a real place because people live in real places and have real lives. And that, you know, is true, but I have been spending a lot of time thinking about how those models, you know, are they really limited to place, or can they, you know, exist in a more global setting? And I think they can, because partly this superorganism formulation of that, they're growing communities of trust with reliable exchanges. That doesn't have to happen in place. So if you can shift it to that, you can still have superorganisms, and you can, I mean, and we know people are adapted to culture. They're not adapted to places. They're adapted to culture. And so we can exist anywhere in the cultural environment is what matters to us.
So I work with the Canadian Film Center as accelerator too, and of course we have a VR lab and all of those things. So you know, metaverse. So I guess I'm heading in that. What do you make of that? Like from a evolutionary point of view, are we all just going to be matrix style bodies in our houses connected on some big metaverse web?
I just think that we, like our biology, we are superorganisms, and we have to make our technical structures match that for us to keep our cultures that maintain our superorganisms. So I don't think we can be one generic global metaverse. I think it has to be patches, patchy networks that are connected with interchange zones between them. But I think we've got to have some kind of structure where change can occur. Because if you don't have those small structures, then novelty cannot reach any kind of point. It just gets drained away. And then we're generic and we don't have any unique, irreplaceable value.
Is it possible that when we move from place to place, that we haven't understood our role in that movement? When the English decided to leave England and come to America
Late
in
69.
this, when they came here, they thought to bring with them something that they knew about that wasn't here, and they brought the dandelion with them. Could we look ourselves as pollinators when we move, or parasites when we move? We've made a big jump to go from one place to the next without understanding the nature we just are participating in. So maybe if the conversation changed, that when you move, you're adapting to a new environment.
I think of it as, you know, like island colonizers, like Hawaii. New seed arrives, and in the beginning, they're an invasive species, right? But over time, they naturalize and they make relationships with the creatures that already live there, and they acquire a role. But I also think, like America, it has, you know, it's been that parasitic pattern where host labor was brought here and existing organisms were wiped out. So I think that we've got some healing to do from a parasitic state. We got some reclaiming to do before we can even address this. And yeah. And then also, what does it take to naturalize? What does it take to belong in a place?
Recently, the conversation has sort of nudged a little bit into how do we talk about stakeholder value and how do you identify stakeholders and what do you do when those stakeholders do not have a voice? But that's just one dimension of purpose. How do you identify shared purpose? And that also speaks to this idea of place, all that are present in the place. How do you create that consciousness of what kinship? And how do you, that there's a reciprocity there?
One of the things we're doing is mythic storytelling. Because, and I, for me, that's been a reconciler. Like here, I've had this art, you know, I'm a painter and a novelist and a scientist. How do you do both? You can't, all the classes are at the same time, you know, it's messed up. But for me, the reconciler has been a mythic story, like
to link it back to this sense of purpose that everyone carries around with them.
Yeah, because I think because they're mythic, they go right to your cosmology and like the very root of the things that matter to you as a people, which is different for different peoples. But I think the stories kind of bring that out in a way that everybody loves a story and everybody loves hearing that and everyone can relate to them. We are just coming in to the hour, but I did want to tell you about the Team Lab. Well, I did tell you about it, but it's at teamlab.com. So I'd love to have you there. There's going to be a ton of resources in there. And tell people if you enjoyed this, tell people about it. Thank you. This is really fun. Thanks so much for joining me.
It was great. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank
So much. Lots to reflect
Thank you.
on in there.
Oh, good.
Badly trying to write it all down, but didn't quite get there.
Yeah, cool.
All right.
All right. Thanks all. Have a great weekend. And thank you so much for your time.